When you read stories like this, your heart sinks. My mom works in an office and I know how it can be. This isn't just content for views. It's a story about real experiences, about how people lose themselves and find themselves again. All names, companies, and addresses are fictional. The goal is for you to recognize yourself and not repeat other people's mistakes.
I knew something was off the moment the settlement log stuttered. One of the Friday morning sweeps kicked up a permissions loop, like someone had jammed a screwdriver into the gears of the machine. Nothing big enough to raise alarms at first glance, just enough to cause a hiccup in the cross-border reconciliation matrix. But the hiccup came from Carter's admin credentials, and Carter hadn't touched the engine in years. I stared at the screen for a few long seconds, heart pacing quiet but steady, like it always did when something didn't fit. Friday was supposed to be routine: clear treasury positions, finalize FX forecasts, flag any compliance exceptions, and then close out by 3:45 before the markets went quiet. But the approval hierarchy? That didn't change. Couldn't change, not without a formal ticket, a cosign, and a compliance beacon firing across 4 systems. And yet, here it was, rewritten and failed 3 times. If you've made it this far into the story, do me a small favor. Tap that subscribe button and like the video. 97% of listeners never subscribe, and it helps the team more than you know. Anyway, I flagged it. Not as a fire drill, just a quiet, neutral memo routed directly to Carter with a CC to the internal compliance archive. I wrote, "Noticed failed attempts to alter hierarchy routing in settlement module, originated from your admin profile. Possibly a test?" Polite, controlled, gave him an out. I always gave people an out. He didn't respond. By 4:15, I'd closed out the cash flow forecasts, queued up the next week's rollover maturities, and synced the week's reports to the shared drive. The logs kept nagging at me, though, so I ran a secondary query. Audit Trail confirmed it. The access attempts came from Carter's admin credential set, routed through his direct terminal. That meant either he was poking around himself, which was unlikely, the man hadn't written a single line of logic in years, or someone was using his login under his nose. And either way, they were trying to nudge themselves into my settlement matrix. What they didn't know, what no one on the exec team seemed to care to remember, was that my access wasn't just granted, it was licensed. Smith Corp Holdings, LLC, my holding company, had issued the settlement module under a governance agreement that was tightly wrapped into my executive services contract. That contract, signed and countersigned, had a sunset date of March 2028. It was 2026. Touching that module without my formal release, that triggered Clause 9.2, full settlement of all entitlements before any administrative transition could be finalized, which meant, in plain English, if they tried to fire me, they'd owe me everything. Now, to be clear, I wasn't planning on leaving. I was 22 years deep. I'd survived 4 CFOs, 2 bankruptcies, a hostile takeover, and 1 unhinged head of compliance who once tried to migrate our treasury engine into Google Sheets. I had no illusions that Carter even remembered what my contract said. He was the kind of guy who thought liquidity cushion meant bringing 2 flasks to the boardroom. But if he was planning something, or if someone was whispering sweet restructuring nonsense in his ear, then this little breadcrumb in the logs was the first flicker of a much bigger fire. By the time I locked my screen and packed up for the weekend, I'd already pushed the encrypted audit trail into cold storage. I printed a copy of my original settlement agreement, sealed it in an envelope, and slid it into my file drawer behind a stack of legacy Eurobond archives nobody touched. Carter thought this was going to be just another quarter-end shuffle, a quiet reorg, trim the edges, maybe even look tough in front of the board. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Carter's email hit my inbox at 9:17 a.m. on Monday. No greeting, no subject line. Just a 4-line ultimatum, as if I were some intern who spilled coffee on his quarterly report. Hand in your resignation, or we'll fire you. Do it today. That was it. After 22 years, not a call, not a meeting, just a digital pink slip lobbed like a beer can from a moving truck. I stared at it for a long while, not angry, not even surprised, just disappointed in the sheer laziness of it. This man had spent years shaking my hand in front of analysts, telling people I was critical infrastructure, and now he wanted to boot me with less effort than ordering a Caesar salad. He hadn't attached anything. No severance, no final payout summary, not even an HRCC, just an impatient demand that I make it easy for him. What he clearly didn't remember, what no one in that glass-walled tower of yes men ever seemed to read, was Section 9.2 of my executive agreement, a clause I'd inserted 10 years ago during a compensation overhaul when the company needed me to rewrite their derivatives reconciliation engine overnight. Section 9.2 said that any departure, voluntary or involuntary, required full settlement of all outstanding entitlements, performance bonuses, equity options, vesting awards, and deferred cash comp before the resignation could take effect. I didn't have to fight. I just had to reply. So I did. I took 15 minutes, not because I needed it, but because I wanted Carter to see the timestamp. I replied, "As requested, I will submit my resignation. Per the terms of my executive agreement, it will be effective upon full settlement and release of all accrued entitlements per Section 9.2. Then I attached a redacted PDF highlighting the clause in question and blind copied our corporate counsel, Olivia Chen. Olivia was smart. She knew how to read smoke signals without starting a fire. I didn't need to explain it to her. The clause was clear. Settlement before resignation. No settlement, no departure. Carter didn't respond. An hour passed. Then 2. I watched the inbox stay blank like a heart monitor flatlining on a bad drama. Around noon, I saw that my reply had been forwarded to legal. Subject line, "Handle this." No comment, no context. Just another middle management pass-off, like a potato that was starting to burn his hands. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window, down at the street below where interns were piling into overpriced salads and underpaid ambition. I'd been them once. Hungry, tired, grateful for scraps. And now, I was a line of code in a contract nobody read until it wrapped around their neck. The absurdity of it all hit me then. That, after building systems that moved billions overnight, surviving restructures, clawbacks, policy changes, and more mergers than I could count, this man really thought a 4-sentence email would be enough to erase me. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. You don't remove the foundation and expect the building to stand. You sure as hell don't remove it without reading the permit. And Carter? He was about to learn what happens when you sign something you never understood. It took less than 3 minutes for my message to make the rounds. Carter had hit forward without even reading what I wrote, just slapped "handle this" into the subject line and passed it down the chain like a toddler chucking a lit match into dry leaves. Legal got it, blinked twice, then someone must have actually read the clause. Not skimmed. Read. 57 minutes after my email left my outbox, I got CC'd on a message from internal counsel to the CEO. The tone was restrained, but the meaning might as well have been written in red ink across a courtroom wall. You just triggered the settlement provision. The resignation is conditional. We are now obligated to begin full reconciliation of all entitlements prior to effective separation. No wiggle room. No, let's talk. Just a quiet grenade pin pulled. I didn't gloat. I didn't even lean back. I just clicked archive on the thread, shut my laptop, and stood up. My hands moved automatically, collecting the printed logs, backing up my compliance thread history, sealing the encrypted drive with the time-stamped ledger keys. I'd prepared for this 3 years ago, when a different CFO tried to simplify reporting lines by pushing me out of the org chart. That guy lasted 7 months. Carter? He wouldn't make it to Friday. Most people don't understand how contracts like mine work. They think resignation means the same thing as I quit. But when your role is woven into the core infrastructure of a global treasury operation, your resignation isn't just a calendar date, it's a chain of events. And Section 9.2 wasn't written to be emotional, it was written to be surgical. The moment I invoked that clause, the entire exit process became conditional. Full payment of all bonuses, full vesting of deferred equity, full release of every retained entitlement, before my departure could be considered legally recognized. There was no room for interpretation. My resignation wasn't a door closing, it was a vault locking. And to make sure no one tried to fudge the sequence, I'd embedded an encrypted signature from my firm's compliance server right into the document metadata. It tracked the server time, the clause version, and the contract hash, all of which were audited annually, verified externally, and legally binding. Once that email was sent, It couldn't be revoked. Not by HR, not by Carter, not even by the board. The moment Carter clicked forward, he turned a paper cut into a hemorrhage. By 2 p.m., I saw the first ripple hit Treasury Ops, a flagged ticket in the forecast sheet, a notice from Risk about an unexplained hold on midweek rollover modeling. Nothing catastrophic yet, just cracks in the foundation. Fractures no one else saw coming. I did. Because this wasn't just about leaving. This was about how I left. Tuesday opened with a quiet kind of chaos, the kind that doesn't scream, it hums beneath fluorescent lights, behind glass-walled offices where no one makes eye contact, and everyone suddenly walks a little faster. By 8:12 a.m., I knew Treasury had hit the wall. They couldn't finalize the FX settlements from Monday's close. The validation pings were failing. Not from an outage, not from a miscode, just absence. The approvals weren't there. The cash projection engine, which depended on those confirmations, started flagging discrepancies in downstream models. That triggered a level 2 liquidity risk alert, which triggered panic. They called IT first, because that's what they always do when something breaks and they don't want to read the documentation. IT pinged me tentatively through our internal escalation channel. Looks like your module's stuck in pending mode. Mind taking a quick look? I didn't reply. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was, quite literally, doing what my contract mandated. Nothing. I was still on the books, legally employed, technically active, but under Section 9.2, any operational intervention on my part prior to full settlement could jeopardize the clause. They hadn't paid. They hadn't even initiated reconciliation. That meant my hands stayed off the wheel. I sat in my home office, drank coffee, and watched it unfold through the same dashboard they had access to, except I knew what every blinking status light meant, every cascading delay, every missed tick. By late morning, they started skipping steps, trying to reroute the reconciliation pathway, loop in secondary approvers, override controls that weren't meant to be touched. That's when things began to buckle. Without the correct entitlements released from my profile, the system refused to propagate approvals. And because it was under Smith Corp's license, my license, it flagged every access attempt as unauthorized. By Wednesday morning, the short-term funding lines hadn't rolled. Overnight swaps expired without coverage. 3 of our regional markets, Singapore, Frankfurt, and Toronto, went dark on the liquidity matrix. Nothing could be posted without those settlement validations. And I still said nothing. Somewhere in the middle of it all, a junior manager sent me a Slack message. I didn't open it, but I saw the preview flash on my screen like a flare. Why is the settlement module saying pending release by Smith Corp Holdings? There it was. The first real question. Not what's broken, not who's fixing it, but the right question. Why? Because when you wrap a settlement engine in a governance clause and anchor that clause to a personal licensing agreement, you don't just leave when someone tells you to. You disengage, you wait, and they unravel. One approval at a time. The board call kicked off at 7:03 a.m. sharp. Cameras on, faces tight. Most of them were still half-dressed in whatever their spouses had handed them. Golf polos, robes, one guy clearly still in bed. No one looked rested. No one even tried to pretend it was a routine check-in. The emergency title on the invite said it all. Operational crisis, Treasury transition. A euphemism, of course. What they meant was, why the hell can't we move money? Carter was already talking before the full board had joined, pacing in his office like a man trying to outrun the fire he'd started. This was meant to be a soft transition, he insisted, voice clipped, breath short. Normal restructuring. We expected a handover period. She's overreacting. He kept calling it a she, not me, not my name, like saying it out loud might confirm what they'd done. Corporate counsel, Olivia, didn't let him finish. She unmuted, eyes calm but sharp, like a surgeon with one hand already inside your chest. Carter, she said, you didn't understand the settlement trigger. The resignation wasn't immediate. It was conditional. You initiated full release with vested entitlements when you accepted her resignation per clause 9.2 without first fulfilling the preconditions. The system is executing per legal structure. Cash flows are frozen until release is certified. Dead silence. The CEO, who'd been ghost pale since joining, leaned forward in his chair. So, we're locked out? Olivia clicked a button. A screen share took over the meeting window. Audit trail display, time-stamped, immutable. There it was. My resignation email, attached clause, and metadata hash logged by the compliance server. This, Olivia continued, is the exact moment full settlement protocol was triggered. The system went into protected mode to ensure no unauthorized activity occurred during transition. It's not a glitch. It's design. I watched from home, coffee in hand, audio off. My camera wasn't on that call, but my presence was felt. Then came the next slide, the one that broke Carter's already thin composure. A log history, thousands of entries long, automatically forwarded to legal in real time. Every edit attempt, every permission escalation, every approval reroute or hierarchy override going back 6 months. All tied to individual admin logins. They hadn't known I'd embedded a compliance beacon directly into the settlement engine, a subroutine triggered by clause activity. It didn't alert me. It alerted counsel. Quietly, automatically, irrevocably. Every change attempt, Olivia said, not looking at Carter, was blind copied to this inbox. We've been monitoring it since her contract amendments in 2021. Someone on the board cursed under their breath. Another cleared their throat, then asked, "How long does this freeze last?" Olivia barely blinked. "Until full compliance is certified and all accrued entitlements are reconciled and released." "And if we just fire her?" someone else muttered. "You can't," Olivia said flatly. "You already accepted the resignation. You acknowledged the clause, and she holds the license." No one spoke after that. The CEO finally turned to Carter and said, "Did you even read her agreement?" Carter didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, mouth slightly open, like maybe if he looked hard enough, the terms would change. They wouldn't. Not today, not ever. Because soft transitions don't start with threats. They start with understanding who you're dealing with. By noon Thursday, it was no longer just red flags on risk dashboards or whispers in the hallway. The entire Treasury platform dropped into safe mode. No warning. No soft failure. 1 minute, people were trying to brute force overrides through expired credentials. The next, the screens dimmed and a message appeared in cold, system font gray. Settlement, pending clearance, contact legal. Every terminal, every region, London, Dubai, São Paulo, locked. No access, no approvals, no transfers. Just that quiet banner looping on repeat like a tombstone for bad decisions. IT tried to run recovery protocols. Compliance tried calling in exemptions. Nothing worked. The architecture didn't respond to internal flags anymore. It waited for legal certification of entitlement release. That was the entire point of the clause. Not to threaten, not to punish, to protect. The engine assumed the company was untrustworthy during separation, so it built a moat until settlement cleared. That clause was my seatbelt. And now, the car was mid-crash. Carter stormed into Olivia's office 15 minutes later, according to a junior legal assistant who'd seen the whole thing from behind the coffee machine. Slammed her glass door so hard it rattled. He looked like a man freshly ejected from the cockpit of a plane he'd never learned to fly. "You have to reverse it," he snapped. "The clause can't mean full lockout." Olivia, bless her, didn't flinch. She closed her laptop gently, folded her hands, and said, "The provision is binding. The system is acting in accordance with the agreement you acknowledged. The entitlements are now due." He paced like a panther in a too small cage. "We don't even have a number yet. You want us to cut a blank check?" "You triggered the clause, Carter. She didn't ask for anything. She followed the procedure. You're the one who signed it and forgot." That's when he said it. Low, guttural, more to himself than anyone else. "Did anyone here actually read the agreement?" No one answered, because they didn't need to. That agreement had been through 4 rounds of legal review, 2 board audits, and had been ratified every year since 2019. Carter had signed it personally in 2022, grinning like he'd just beaten a car salesman out of a few grand. He'd highlighted the salary bump, skimmed the bonus section, skipped the clauses entirely, and now the engine he thought was just another tool had transformed into a sealed vault with Olivia holding the only key. I wasn't there to see it. Not in the building. Not in the city. I was 2 time zones away at a cabin on a lake I hadn't visited in years. Fire crackling, coffee hot, my phone buzzing in the next room, unanswered. But I knew the exact moment the alarms went off. I felt it in the stillness, the kind of silence that only comes after someone's dug their own grave, and just realized they're standing in it. By Friday, legal had fully taken over the disaster Carter had set in motion. Gone were the days of corporate theater. No more posturing, no more damage control briefings, just grim silence and document review. Amendment by amendment, they combed through every iteration of my contract, hoping, desperately, that some loophole, some clause out of sync would give them a way out. They found nothing. Every version had been reviewed, approved, reapproved, signed and countersigned through annual audit, every clause cross-referenced in compliance. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was hidden. They had authorized it all, year after year, probably thinking I'd never use it. Carter stopped showing up to calls. No fiery resignation, no brave statement, just vanished. His calendar stayed blank, his office door closed. I heard through a former team lead that his executive assistant had been reassigned, pending restructuring. Translation: he was in free fall, and no one wanted to be near him when he hit bottom. His deputy didn't wait. She submitted her resignation midweek with a 1-sentence farewell. I no longer believe in the leadership direction of this firm. They'd tried to spin it in the Friday all hands, but people weren't stupid. When both your top treasury execs disappeared during a liquidity freeze, the narrative writes itself. Meanwhile, they brought in my successor, some bright-eyed VP from another vertical, fast-tracked, MBA'd, supposed to be some merger whisperer. She logged into the system, tried to submit a simple rollover approval, and hit the same wall Carter did. Blocked. Her profile lacked clearance under the legacy governance structure. The architecture recognized her ID, but refused to acknowledge it as valid for execution, because I'd written the logic myself. And more importantly, the logic was tied to settlement state, not headcount. Until the clause was honored, until every entitlement certified and released, no one, not even the Pope, was getting that engine to move. She submitted an urgent IT ticket. IT routed it to legal. Legal quietly closed it. I didn't say a word. They tried to call. They tried to email. Some even sent texts through personal numbers they hadn't used in years. Little phishing lines disguised as check-ins. Hope you're well. Just curious. Can we chat? I didn't answer. Not because I was bitter, but because silence is the only appropriate response to people who never took your voice seriously until it came wrapped in a contract. That Friday evening, Olivia's assistant found something in the archive. An old memo I'd drafted and filed in the compliance library under GOV 47 Settlement Protocols. Title: Settlement Governance, Full Release Only Upon Compliance Certification. It was dated 4 years back, co-signed by audit, unchallenged at the time of execution. It clearly spelled out that no entitlements could be considered released unless compliance formally signed off, triggering the full system handoff. They had all signed it. No one remembered doing so, and that was the beauty of it. They had built their own prison. I just made sure the locks worked. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was dignified. Because sometimes the most powerful message you can send is no message at all. The CEO's name flashed on my phone late Sunday evening. Blocked number, of course. I let it ring 3 times before answering. No rush. He was the one calling from a sinking ship. I was on dry land, coffee in one hand, contract in the other. He skipped pleasantries, went straight for desperation. "We want to bring you back," he said. "Stabilize things. Maybe not full-time, but a consulting retainer or an advisory board seat. You've got institutional knowledge no one else does. You built the system." I listened. He used the phrase, "steady the ship" 3 times in 5 minutes. He used the word respect twice, like seasoning to mask an otherwise flavorless apology. He didn't mention Carter by name, but the pause between recent decisions and short-sighted moves told me everything I needed to know. That man was gone, or as good as. I didn't gloat. I didn't ask for numbers. I just said, the contract executed as written. And that was that. I didn't want their board seat. I didn't want a retainer. I didn't want my name anywhere near their recovery plan. What I wanted, what I did, was handpick someone better. I I recommended my protege, Nora, smart, quiet, detail-obsessed. She'd shadowed me for 5 years and never once made the mistake of confusing visibility with value. She knew every quirk in the engine, every nuance of the compliance flow, and she knew how to say no, which, in that company, was a dying art. They brought her in under a provisional certification agreement. She didn't touch the system for the first 48 hours, just observed, took notes, let the panic burn itself out while legal scrambled to finalize my entitlement release. When that was done, we updated the engine together. I'd built it once to be functional. Now, we built it to be untouchable. Escrow-verified clearances only, quarterly refreshes on all governance keys, role-based access throttled to compliance-signed hierarchy maps, every clearance logged to external audit chains. No more admin overrides. No more emergency delegations. No more Carter-style backdoor bravado. The system now required humility to function, and if they didn't have it, it simply wouldn't move. Nora sent me a message after her first full week. System is calm. They're learning. That was enough. Back at HQ, Carter's grand, lean and simple treasury reorg, the one he'd sold to the board with buzzwords and clip art, was officially shelved. Indefinitely. They didn't announce it. They just stopped mentioning it. Deleted the slide deck. Quietly dismantled the task force. Let the silence bury it the way failed ideas deserve to be buried. It didn't take a war. It just took remembering that contracts aren't threats. They're boundaries. And I had drawn mine in permanent ink. Weeks passed. Markets steadied. Settlement queues cleared like melting snow from an April sidewalk. Slow, clean, inevitable. The panic faded, but the architecture didn't forget. It never does. The new system bore scars, but not the kind that weaken. It had been rebuilt with tighter wiring, smarter locks. Governance wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was law. Escrow-verified tokens replaced manual overrides. All approvals cross-referenced against live compliance state. Access now lived in consensus, not assumption. At every login screen across the organization, a small line had been embedded at the footer, just above the rotating ticker of Treasury updates and compliance notices. It read, without flair, Settlement Execution and Entitlement Release under Smith Corp Holdings Governance License. No override without compliance ratification. No one could remove it. Not without triggering the same fail-safes Carter once thought were optional. The line sat there quietly, not screaming for attention, but holding the weight of 1,000 decisions that had come before it. I didn't ask for it to be added. It was Nora's idea, a small reminder carved in digital stone. Some of the newer execs hated it, said it made the system feel locked. But it wasn't locked. It was guarded, and they weren't used to guardrails. At the spring industry webcast, the CEO gave a pre-written speech, clearly vetted, likely rehearsed at least a dozen times. He looked thinner, tired, but measured. When he got to the part about treasury controls, he paused and said, "We've learned a lesson in contract respect, and in systems design. We're better for it." He didn't mention me by name. He didn't have to. The message wasn't for the room. It was for anyone watching who still thought loyalty meant silence. Who still thought legacy employees were just placeholders for a younger, shinier model, who thought settlement was something you could shortcut with a memo and a deadline. I watched from my study, curtains drawn, dog asleep on the floor, coffee cooling by my side, no smirk, no satisfaction, just stillness, because I never raised my voice, never slammed a door, never filed a lawsuit or made a scene. All I did was write things down, get them signed, get them certified, and when the time came, I let the words do their job. Authority isn't loud, it's precise, and it's written.